I'm Judy Ross, and I've lived in Point Roberts for about 25 years. And my connection with the library is that I come to the library, first of all, and it's in a long line of libraries I've gone to. But my major connection with the library was that I was the chief fundraiser for the new building that we are in this moment sitting in. And that was a 9-year project.
Wow.
During which time the expected amount we needed to raise doubled.
So what was the original amount?
The original was about 450,000 and it ended up at 900,000, which is a challenge in a place that has only 1,300 permanent residents, about a third of whom are not here half the year, even though they are permanent residents.
So what made you decide that we needed a library here?
Well, I didn't really decide that. I mean, it wasn't somehow that I was sitting at home thinking what we really need is a new library. There was a library and I was grateful for it, and I used to talk about it. I would refer to it as the cutest Dickensian library still extant in the 20th century, but it seemed to do what needed to be done. But the people down at WCLS came up and said, we think there should be a new library here, but because of the policies that we have, the funds would have to be raised up here. And I went to a meeting about it, and I said, well, I'll volunteer to work on that. And I wasn't the head of it. I've done a lot of grant writing in my history at universities. And I thought, well, that might give me, but I've never actually asked anybody in person for money. I can write you a swell grant. I can write you a short letter, but that was not part of what I did. But I didn't plan to be doing that. I planned to be I'm a pretty good organizer, and I thought I would help this group of people who had volunteered, and one person who had volunteered to be the head of it all, and to take minutes. And, for the starters, we had this plan, and we had to involve the community a little bit, and we sort of did some of those things. But I got kind of frustrated because I didn't see anything coming on for how to make any money or get any money for it. It seemed to be, we were involved in getting a 501c3 and getting an agreement, memo of understanding with the Park and Recreation Service. So there was all that kind of stuff. But I guess it went on for maybe the first 6-7 months, and I kept saying, I don't understand how we're going to get the money to do this. I mean, it's sort of silly to plan for it if you don't have a plan for how the money's going to, since that's what your job is here. And so I started kind of pushing that issue a bit and suggesting that we needed to have an actual specific plan. And so someone said, well, let me put something together for the next meeting. And I said, I'm taking the notes. So I said, okay, I'll make a note of that. I wasn't the chairman of this or anything, but so at the next meeting, that person brought a thing and it had 3 columns. And it said, and the columns had the top of it said, raising money. And then in the first column it said, who to go to, who will do it, and when. And I was sort of taken aback by that as a plan. And so I went to my quilt group here, not my quilt group, it's quilt group's members quilt group, and suggested to them, they're all good, solid people and good readers and all of that, and suggested to them that maybe we could do something to raise the money. And so we did do that and planned it out. And it was about 3 or 4 months, and it was in the winter time, and we did a fiber art festival. And we made a couple of $1,000, and that was the first money we had in this pot for this. And this committee for fundraising just kind of fell apart. Since there wasn't, I mean, I had done that as a member of the quilt group, not as a member of this, but nothing was happening. And I had been to a meeting here in Point Roberts about the fire district, and a guy had stood up and said, the job of the board, in this case, of commissioners, is to pick a person who's running this project and make sure that it works. It's not to run it against him, to keep second guessing him. And I thought, I need to talk to somebody and he sounds like he knows something about something that I don't know much about. I by now was sort of the head of this committee. The person who was going to do it had decided not to. And so I went to talk to him and I said, but I've got this committee. I asked them at the previous meeting, each one of them, are you prepared to go talk to somebody and ask them for money? And each one of them had said no. They were happy to like put together a tea or a thing, but they weren't going to ask people for money. And I was pretty sure that for $500,000 we were not going to run this war on a bake sale. And so I went to talk to him, and I didn't know him except that I'd seen him at this meeting. And he said, well, you need to select some people who you have confidence in and work with them. And I said, but nobody on the committee wants to do this. He said, make another committee. So I just did. I engaged my husband, who is an economist, who was an economist, he's no longer alive. And he'd never done any fundraising either. And a couple of other people I knew who knew Point Roberts better than I did. And so there were about 5 of us, and we made a list of people we needed to go ask for money, and we all started by doing that. And we'd go in pairs, or we'd go by ourselves if it was somebody, to try to find the person who would be good at that, to asking that person. And it was just not anything any of us had ever done before. But it was in some ways easy, because the thing that most often I heard from people was, oh, who doesn't like a library? Now, actually, I do know now some people who don't. But at the time, I agreed, who doesn't like a library? Who doesn't think that would be a good idea? And so we went to people, and people gave us money. And some people said, well, I think it's too much, I think, for a place this size. And other people said, I don't think the plans are good enough. We should have something really grand so that when we have people come to visit us in the summer, we can take them to see this library, which I think they were thinking we might get Frank Garrett to design it. And so you ran into a whole range of stuff from people. But we just all kept at it. And we would say here, and then we would think of little ways to get people involved with small money. So we were working both big money and small money at the same time. And one of the first things we did was talk to the bank about how if people would bring their change jars to the bank, would the bank count it and put it in our account? They said, sure. And so I wrote a column every month for the newspaper, so that was mostly how we got information out. And so we set this up, they would do it for a month. And people I had no idea everybody's kitchen was filled with change jars. I've always kept change in my wallet, actually. But apparently there are vast numbers of people who have it in a jar in their closet. And people would come in with 2 or 3 jars, $100, $200. I mean, not everybody had that much. The walking group set aside a day in which they all walked down to the bank and brought their change. Wow. And so we had lots of littler things like that. The grocery store, if you would leave your receipt for your groceries in the box that we made for the door, then the grocery store would give us 10% or something of each receipt over a month. And that meant we had Canadians. But then you had to go down and tell them that since there wasn't a good way to communicate with them, so we had to sit in front of the grocery store and tell them that this is how that was going to happen. And that ended up with quite a bit of money there. So there was that kind of thing. And then people would sometimes come up and say, I'd be willing to organize a movie night there used to be a restaurant down here. And so they would do that. And it was just one thing after another of that sort of thing. No. And then you would get the news that, oh, it's just gone up another $100,000. So you'd go back around to all the people who you asked directly for money and ask them again, and you kept on doing the other stuff. And that's how it happened.
Just one step at a time.
Just one step at a time. And Christine Perkins said someplace where we were at a meeting, and she said, well, Judy's just indefatigable. And I thought, I don't really feel like I'm indefatigable. I feel like I'm in defeat most of the time, like everybody else that's struggling up a mountain. But it never occurred to me that we couldn't actually get this money one way or another. Now, largely that was my error in thinking I could write grants to get it. I'm a good grant writer. I've written grants that got $1 million. But what I failed to understand was that foundations don't like to give money for capital programs.
Yeah.
And I understood after it was explained to me why that was a dim idea for them, because they obviously are afraid that you'll never get the money. So they'll give you the money and then you'll never get the rest of it. And I am so grateful to the 5 foundations in Washington State that did give us money. Not $1 million, but enough that all of them together were about 100,000 or 80,000 or something like that. I thought the government would have grants. Unfortunately, we started, I think, 2 years maybe after the great crash. And the year before we started looking at government grants, 2 years before we started, they had put out a whole bunch of big money into rural libraries, but it had all been spent.
Oh, wow.
So I would be talking to people and they'd say, "Oh, sounds great, we'd love to help you, but we don't have any money left from that." The state didn't have any money left, so we got nothing from the government in grants. The county, sensibly, that is county government, said, you know, if we gave you money for this, we'd have to give everybody money for this, and we don't have any money to give everybody. And but then it happened. And, well, the bad part of it was, the long happening, was we had always had the idea that if we could get most of it, but we need a little bit more, we could go to the voters here and ask them for a small tax increase for a year, which we hoped that we wouldn't need any money with that. And when we got the $450,000, that was when we got the shift up to it being 900. Or actually, that was the first shift. It went from 450 to 750. Later, it went from 750 to 9. And so we were going to have to ask them at that time, we thought, for $150,000. And the chairman of the Park and Recreation District, which owns the building that we sit in, and which put no money into the building which we sit in initially, or through those years. The chairman of it opposed it, putting out this request for tax increase for 1 year. And it was $100, I'm going to forget the numbers here, but it was, it averaged for the property tax, it was on average $100 for 1 year. Yes, there are 3,000 properties and we needed 300,000, so it was $100 per year. Now, obviously, everybody's house didn't cost $100,000, but so people on the $1 million houses would have been a big budget. But the week before the election, the chair of the committee wrote a letter to the newspaper and opposed this property tax increase, 1 year. And we didn't hear about it until she got it to the newspaper just right before the deadline. So the day I didn't hear about it until after the deadline had passed, and we couldn't write any response or anything. And because it's Washington and they have this peculiar 60% requirement, but I come from California where they have Prop 13, so I know I know those kinds of restrictions. I've learned to live with them. But we lost by about, 15 votes, something like that. And then it just was heartbreaking at that point. But we went back out, and we had people who gave us 3 people who gave us $25,000 each.
Wow.
Who were outraged. And who had not given us $25,000. They'd given us money, but not $25,000. And so we got the $150,000 we needed, and then we needed some more. But the loss of the election, of the vote, I would have felt worse about it if I had time to.
Yeah.
And so seeing it, here now, in reality, people said, did it look like what you expected it to? And I said, I didn't actually have I saw the pictures, but the pictures were the outside, not the inside. I didn't have any expectations. This wasn't something I was making. I make quilts, and I have some idea what I'm doing when I'm making a quilt, but I wasn't making a building. And I say, no, it doesn't. I didn't really ever think about that. It was just get the money, then turn it over to the people who know what they're doing to build it. And so it came to be, and so I came to be, and in the middle of it, well, before the election, the vote that we lost, my husband died, and he had been just a rock behind me in this. And he had died expecting that it was that the vote would go through, and it was done. And he had had cancer for 6 years, so and there was a part of him, he said, I think I can leave now. I think we're set. And so I had that too. I was not going to quit him on that. And and we did it, and Beth said we did it, and other people were just as enormously helpful. It wasn't just us. I mean, we didn't give $900,000. The WCLS came through right at the end with about $150,000, the last part we needed. And I'm forever grateful to them for that. And that they changed their policy to do that so that other places will equally benefit. It's great. And so we go.
So what's the takeaway from this?
I guess for me, it's that, people said, why did you do it? I said, well, I grew up in libraries, essentially. I had one of the terrible experiences of my life was in the library, 2 of them actually. I went to the library, I was maybe 7 years old in Idaho, in a high mountain town. And I went early in the morning when they first opened to get some books, and I went home and I got 2 books, and took them home and I read them and I brought them back so I could get 2 more. And they wouldn't let me turn them back in because I hadn't had them long enough. They felt I had not liked them, or I was just making trouble or something. And then when I was 13, they let me go up to the grown-up library. And I became less conscientious about getting books in on time. And one day I went in, my mother went in actually, had not been in, and they had a poster behind the desk of people who had overdue books, and my name was on it. And she came home and told me she'd never been so embarrassed in her life.
Wow.
But
it's like you'd written a bad check or something.
Yes, it was a true moral failing. And but on the other hand, libraries have been, I don't know that they made me what I was, but certainly I grew up during the war. I was born before the war started, and people didn't have books. We didn't have any books at home. We had a dictionary, Bible, I suppose. But you didn't have books that you had. And so that it just amazed me that they would just let me take them. Nothing else in town, the little town I did, they could let me take things. And I've always felt it was a place that everybody had a right to be. Everybody could have what they had to offer, and you didn't have to have money. And in fact, I feel that more strongly now. Just where we've come in over the last 80-some years as a culture, that everything has a price. And you're a customer everywhere in the unfortunate sense of the word customer. Yeah. And at the library, you're not.
You're a patron.
Yeah. Wow. And indeed, we are all patrons in both senses of the word.